I think that I'm more focused on, though we know the long-term goal, I'm more focused maybe on the short term and making sure that we have the right pieces together and that our people are happy. And I guess I feel today is as long as the foundation is good, we'll likely get there. So I'm not necessarily as focused on the destination long term. I'm focused on that like first three-hour trip of the a 3-segmented RV trip down to Florida, right?
Right.
That's kind of how I describe it. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Exit Is Now podcast with me, your host, Scott Snider, back in the studio with my friend and our Director of Business Development, Jesse Hudson. Glad to have him back on the show. I don't think you've been here for like a year or so. You're still doing podcasts with us when we were doing them like straight live, not the recording live.
Yes.
So you were part of the original bunch. So this year, Jesse's with us today because in this season 2 of the Exit Is Now podcast, we wanted to throw a couple of curveballs, I guess I could say, inside of the show where we kind of flip the script. So we're inviting people into the show every 4 or 5 episodes throughout the year that will actually interview me. People that are close to me, people that have seen us walk through the value acceleration methodology, who, just like Jesse, has really worked through the value acceleration methodology with us here too at EPI, and has really seen the growth story. Jesse was probably the 5th employee that we had.
Yeah, 5 or 6.
5 or 6 employee that we had, and really has seen the company grow. So with that, I could tell you I don't have any papers on the desk. I don't have really anything prepared. If you guys know me and know me well, I'm a pretty open book, so I did not prepare. So with that, let's take it away. Jesse, it's your show.
Thanks for having me, Scott, or I guess I should say welcome to my show now.
Welcome, and happy Valentine's Day.
Yes, you too. Quick side story on that. Every year for Valentine's Day, my wife and I, we always go to a Mexican restaurant.
Okay.
Because you don't need a reservation, and we have 2 young children, and you can just bring them in there, get your food quick, get it in and out, and we've been doing that ever since my son was born. So that's kind of our tradition.
Well, that's going to be a solid evening.
It'll be great.
Okay.
It'll be great.
Okay.
So I guess with that, it's funny, your intro kind of leads right into a little bit of what I was thinking for our conversation today, because the unique position that I have, within this company is really like history and context and just knowing you for a long time. I mean, you and I, 37, 38 years old, we're not old, but we're old enough to run for president.
That is true.
So
2050.
Yeah, coming up. So we've seen some things, and we've actually crossed that mark in time where you and I have known each other for longer than we haven't known each other.
That's true.
I was just doing the math on that. So I just think that it's an interesting place to be, and it gives us some unique challenges, but also helps us work through challenges.
Yeah. That's fair to say.
So actually, I real quick, I do want to talk about the time we first met, because I just love this story, and I want to get your perspective on it, and I think I'll give you a little bit of my perspective. So why don't you start us off there with the first time that you met myself?
I actually think about this quite a bit. So your wife, Jessica, and me, and then my ex-wife, Jackie, were like 3 peas in the pod. Right? Jackie, Jessica, and me. And we used to go like bowling together. I used to smoke cigars in the bowling alley. We would, and in the summer, and we do all kinds of stuff together. This is back in high school for our audience. So this goes way back. I guess for me that would have been like 2003, right? And when we would go camping every year, and Jessica's family had like jet skis, so we tried to get up around Lake Erie or to an inland lake. You guys had gone away to college, and that, I think it was like that first summer back. She said, hey, I have a boyfriend now, and I'd like to bring my boyfriend on our summer camping trip, and we're going to go up to Balmy Bay. And I remember thinking like, oh, man, kind of a bummer, because like we have this nice thing going on, and now this brand new guy that I don't think Jackie and I, Jackie hadn't met either, is going to go spend all weekend, not just like have a beer with us, but like we're going to go all weekend hanging out with this guy. I hope it's going to go well. And you pulled up in your car, and I remember me and Jackie were already there and set up. And you guys got out, and it was back when Jesse used to have like long hair, right? Long hair. He had a trucker's ball cap on.
Yep.
He had boots on and jeans, and then one of those cut-off sleeveless shirts that you made yourself that would go like all the way down to your waist so you could show off the muscles a little bit.
I used to have them.
And I remember you getting out of that car and I remember looking at that guy, looking at Jackie, looking back at you and saying, I'm going to like that guy a lot, right? He had like fishing poles, and we ended up being into like the very similar things. And I knew that weekend ended up going fantastic. And I remember saying, like, Jessica, though I told you shouldn't bring him, you actually now should bring that guy around a lot more. Right. And so, that's how I met Mr. Jesse Hudson.
I think it's funny to hear that because I don't necessarily have a first impression of meeting you. Yeah. I actually kind of take that first weekend in totality because at the time you were owning and operating M&S Connection.
Yeah, I had my landscaping company.
And you were like the first business owner I'd ever met.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like, I mean, other than, maybe somebody that ran the local McDonald's where I grew up, but like, like you were the first business owner I ever met. Sure. And that was just a weird thing to have somebody who's my age that's running their own company. And also you were the most planned out person I'd ever encountered up to that point in my life. Like sometimes. I just kind of like let life happen sometimes, but you were like, all right, Jesse, you're here and we need to set up this thing. And then after that we have this thing and then tomorrow morning.
When we go on these camping trips today, now we've graduated from the tent to a motor coach.
Yeah, we were in
but that thing is, set up just right, and there is a way that you get it set up when you park. And to your point, when we go, I'm always the trip planner. So that's funny that you noticed that kind of right out of the gate.
Yeah,
I take a lot of shit for that.
Well, I guess my point in starting there is, we've known each other a long time. We've grown a lot, but some things remain the same. Yeah. Kind of like your attention to detail and planning. And you already mentioned I was employee number 5 or 6 here. Mm-hmm. Well, we're looking at 30 employees here now at the Exit Planning Institute.
It's wild.
And I think that's one of the first questions that I want to pose to you is, if you had to point to one thing that got you from 19-year-old Scott Snider to where we are now, president and owner of the Exit Planning Institute, what do you think was the key for that? And I've got a couple of things here. Is it family? Is it friends? Is it just having the opportunity? Is it some of the education or mentors that you received early on? And it could be none of those things. But if you had to maybe pick out one thing that's been real instrumental over the last 2 decades, what would you point to?
Yeah, I would say that's a good question. And for our audience, again, too, this is I didn't know any of these questions. So you'll see me pause a little bit so I can think about it. But the first thing that comes to mind when I think about the 2 decades of owning a business, whether it was M&S, the landscaping company, or Exit Planning Institute, the professional education company, I would always say there's a huge influence of people. I think that my dad said early on in my business owner career, like when I started in my teenage years, to always be a sponge, right? So like a sponge absorbs water, you should absorb knowledge. So if there's a person ready and willing to give some mentorship, even though you might not always agree, just kind of take it in. And I would say that of our course of the 10 years that we've owned, 10 plus years, I guess, that we've owned EPI, and how long have you been here for that?
This is my 6th year, going into my 7th year, yeah.
So for being around you 6 or 7 years, what you probably, and maybe you do realize, maybe you do, that you've been as much as a peer to me as you've been as a mentor. I remember hiring you in, and you brought experience in sales and customer service. You brought strategy and a perspective that not only did I guess I didn't appreciate at the time, but I also didn't know what I didn't know. Right. And so I think that it's just the power of people in your life that have really kind of influenced you throughout those decades. And I think that I'd like to think that I've always been pretty good at accepting mentorship along the way, whether it be from somebody that works with me every day like you, somebody like my father, or I always think about in the landscape days, a gentleman named Tom Emmett, who gave me my first book on helping grow landscape companies. Really? It was and I laugh about it today. I think I still have it on my bookshelf at home, but it wasn't actually like a bound book like Chris's Walking to Destiny book. It was like a spiral notebook that he had pieced together himself, and he would hand out to guys that he would mentor. Tom had sold his landscaping company, stayed in that green industry, if you will, and started a Walker and Wright mower distribution company.
Oh, really?
Right. So he was a guy that I would take my stuff in to get serviced or buy my new equipment from. And he said, "Look, you're young. Read this book I wrote about how I started my landscaping company." So I think it's just the power of people and being open to feedback along the way, whether you kind of agreed with or not, taking it in from guys and gals that have kind of done it, twice or triple as long as that you have.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another quick aside story here. So when I first moved to the Cleveland area, I met my wife Jessica actually while we were going to college at Ohio State.
Yep.
And we both graduated during the recession. And she graduated before me, and because Ohio State was on quarters back then. And I graduated in the summer, and I was trying to move up to Cleveland so that we can continue to be in a relationship. And I'm putting jobs applications in at bars, restaurants, and I knew you and just hit you up and said, "Hey, do you have any place you could put me?" And you ended up putting me on a weed eater and a mower. And unfortunately, it was my first time driving like a big landscape mower, and one of the first properties I ever mowed, I didn't notice that the back tire was flat, and I just scalped this lawn. And I went and got you and said, "Scott, something's wrong with this mower." This lawn.
I'm like, "Dude, the tire's flat, man. Like, what do you mean it's not? There's definitely something wrong with that mower." It was that city contract that we had.
It was.
It's interesting to think about when you joined EPI, because that in my business career, that was also kind of a moment, because we were hit kind of hard by the recession too.
Yeah.
Is that we had this theme, and folks that follow the show may have heard me talk about my previous company a little bit. I think, landscaping is a landscape company, although it can be a very good company. I think it really breaks like all of the business like 101. There's no barriers to entry. It's a crowded market. It's price driven, right? So it's not necessarily like a wildly great business to be in. But while we wanted to make ourselves different back then, was we wanted to work with people and companies that use their image to sell their product.
Right.
But in the recession, those people started to cut their costs. And I couldn't do the price cuts, being a small company, that some of the big national brands that I was competing with could do at these large, like 1,000-unit luxury condos sitting on 250 acres, where you'd take 8 guys over there and you'd maintain the property. It would take all day. So we had to cut back, and I was scrounging a little bit for some cash flow.
Yeah.
And so I applied to a city contract, which was totally outside of thinking about it now, right? Like totally outside the core values of who we were.
Right.
But I needed the cash. And we got this city contract that was like vacant properties in a wealthier suburb of Cleveland, and they didn't like that, right? So they would go in and hire a company to just maintain. Like we had like 50 homes,
a lot of
or 50 homes and small commercial properties that if you drove past them and they needed mowed, the city would instruct you to mow them. So I think what it was, right, is that we didn't have to mow all 50, but we would drive around all day and just make that route. And if it was cuttable grass, we'd go in there. Moral of the story is, luckily, Jesse learned his lesson at the place that was like the vacant home of a city contract, so it wasn't the high image oriented property. But yeah, it was if you could imagine a large commercial mower with a big 50-inch, 54-inch deck, and you stand on top of it. He had to be standing like this, driving, and if you're watching on our channel, driving sideways. And he didn't realize what was going on.
Just thought it was hilly. It was just a hilly property.
So nonetheless, it was kind of cool. That's actually kind of a cool story, though, because you got to see how I worked, I guess, at least in that environment early on. Yeah. And so then you went away for a while, right, and then came back, right? So you worked there for like maybe a year, a summer?
Barely a year, I think, because we made it into snowplow season.
You did a little bit of that.
Yeah,
we had that big truck breakdown in Westlake.
Yeah, I'm not good luck when it comes to you and your machineries.
That is true, man. That whole plow truck the plow wouldn't go down. It was like, if you're a Midwesterner, right, you're in Cleveland, you're getting like blasted with snow. Yeah. And our plow broke. The one that you were driving.
Yes, but I didn't break it. It just happened to break.
Just the hydraulics broke
happened to break. Well, you already opened this door a little bit.
Sure.
I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I think it fits in nicely with our conversation here. Fast forwarding, my time here is really where I feel like I've learned a lot. Not that I didn't learn a lot from you landscaping.
Yeah, right.
But it's really advanced myself, my knowledge, my acumen professionally in my time being surrounded by you and your father, Chris. Yeah. And, seeing you guys leverage our exit planning process, the value acceleration methodology in and throughout a business has been very impactful. Yeah. Impactful in the way that I view the world. You and I had this conversation a couple years ago where I finally was able to kind of put myself in your shoes and start thinking like a business owner and even talking to you in a way, not to be manipulative, but just like, I think this is how Scott's going to see this. Yeah. So why don't I talk about it in that way instead of, completely being sales and business development minded in my focus. But what would you say has been a big takeaway for you or something? You talked a little bit about me teaching you a few things. Where would you say that specifically during our time here at the Exit Planning Institute, how have I had an impact on you?
So a few things come to mind just based on that story. I think that's a pivotal point, I think, in your career too, where you were able to, the kind of light bulb went off and you started now, and this is now, folks, like recent, like 3 to 4 years ago, where we reformed our executive leadership team post-COVID, and the light bulb kind of switched to you in a more sophisticated, I think, world of EPI and a more sophisticated leadership team. And that was one of the key things that I think moves our managers to directors, is this mindset shift of, I'm not just an employee, I'm an executive, and Chris and Scott are also challenging me to think like them and be an owner. So although I run a bunch of sales folks, and I have to represent them in their compensation plans, and as a salesperson yourself that was in those shoes, I would want this, but if I'm Chris and Scott, I have to challenge it to look at it this way as well. And I think that was like a pivotal moment for you to that kind of mindset shift into this ownership that has really, I think, advanced your career, certainly here, and you as a professional. I think lessons learned, there's a couple that come to mind kind of right out of the gate. I talk to you about this one a lot, and I talk about it with our company a lot too. You have to have somebody waking up giving a shit about something every single day. And if you rewound 7 years ago when you started at EPI, we were all doing a lot of a little, like a little bit of sales, a little bit of member experience, a little bit of this and that, and you were truly the first 100% focused person to come into EPI to say, all I'm going to do every single day is run sales for you and sell new CEPAs. And I just think that whether you knew that was your lesson or not, having you in there focused on that every single day, you could start to see the sales tick. Then I think that you're the first employee that I hired. So whether it was my landscaping company folks or EPI in the early days, I just hired people that I trusted. So like a lot of folks know Josh Koza. Like Josh Koza was a hire that was a longtime friend that was in logistics in Columbus, Ohio, but I trusted Josh, and I knew that he could get the job done in any way that I put him in. Now, I also trust you, and I remember having you pop up on the radar and say, okay, this is the guy that has similar traits as in loyalty, trust, friendship, that I can trust in helping me grow this thing, but you're the first hire that said, now I have an expertise in sales.
Right.
And it was actually, if I'm being totally honest with you, it was kind of intimidating because I was like, okay, this guy's smarter than me. And because me and Josh were like back then just winging things, right? So it's like, not that Josh and I are smarter than each other, but like if I looked at Josh like, I have no idea how to run this event. And I was like, well, neither do I. So let's wing this thing together. I couldn't do that with you because you were like, dude, I'm almost like a classically trained salesperson. And I've spent, a career in different areas doing sales type work and working with new customers and current customers and upselling people and cross-selling people. And I remember you looking at my windows. So we had, big glass pane windows. This is at an old EPI office. Yeah. We're up on the 4th floor of a building, if you can imagine. And we had a corner conference room that was all windows on one side and all windows on the other. And my sales process before I had Jesse come into our business was to take literally Post-it notes, like little square Post-it notes. And if you're an old school CEPA, I guess, that would have been sold in 2014, 2013, something like that, you probably came from this sales approach. I'd write your name on a sticky note and hang it up on a window. In a past life, I also wanted to be like a U.S. Marshal, FBI type agent, detective. Yeah. And I pictured my sales process as if I was investigating a crime, and I needed to put them into jail. So like the ticket would come off the window once I either said they were not the suspect, right? So get them out of the case, or they were my prime suspect, which in our world meant that you became a CEPA. And Jesse looked at my process and he said, and if you guys are sitting here listening to me explain the story, you're saying, what the hell is that? And we're taking all of these sticky notes down. We're going to put things into a process. We got to get a system. We got to get data to track them. And then you just had a generally different approach to things. And what's the cool thing about that is to watch that advance over the 6 or 7 years, because now we use a system called HubSpot, and you're writing playbooks inside of that system.
Right.
And in the EPI world, and for our listeners that are certified exit planning advisors, Jesse has not only created an owner mindset for himself, but he's gone from income generator to value creator. So now what Jesse is doing is putting stuff in a system that not only allows him to train his people better, but it's long-term structural capital. And if you're a CEPA, we know one of the 4 C's, it really is a contributor to overall value. So if you take that 7-year run that you've had, you really have taught me about the importance of like documented strategy, systems and processes, data-driven decisions. Like when you came here talking about winging it, I was creating Excel spreadsheets that projected our financial future based really on no data at all, at just gut, which was another learning moment for me, because you said, Scott, why? And maybe it was a learning moment for you too, to challenge you to be a little bit more entrepreneurial.
I'd agree with that.
Because you're like, Scott, what data shows you that you could go do that? And I said, well, none. I just like feel we can go there. And you said, okay, let me see. You didn't say I was wrong. You said, well, let me see if I could put the data that might support that. And so that whole thing for me was like a huge mindset shift from putting somebody fully in charge of one thing to the strategy and data and playbooks and the buyer personas and conversations. And then I would say last, to wind down this rabbit hole that I'm going down, that was a recent discovery for me, is I always identified myself in business as a sales guy. I always felt good, like, I could sell. And maybe it was good because, for the most part, before you came along, I was the primary salesperson. Right. And I felt pretty good about landing, 5 CEPAs a month, Right. And what I realized just in the past 2 or 3 years, that I'm actually not a business development person. I'm probably more of an account manager, or even more of just like a customer service and more of a relationship person. Right. Because I would get on the phone, and for our audience, Jesse would be like, dude, it sounded like that guy wanted to buy something from you. And I was like, yeah, I just will email him later. And he goes, dude, you got to ask for the sale, man. I still, to this day, at 38 years old, don't know how to process a credit card. So if you do call my office and want to buy something from me, I'll have to give you to somebody else, because I seriously still don't understand how to process a credit card payment, which is always talk about lessons learned. Those are all kind of things along the way that kind of stick in mind for me.
Very cool.
So let's pause real quick. Let's get to our first break of the show. We'll be right back, and Jesse will continue to hammer me with some questions. Just give us a quick sec. We'll be right back.
For business owners, by a business owner. Walking to Destiny is your essential resource for understanding what makes your business highly profitable and significant. It becomes a business owner's handbook to know how to rapidly grow value and ultimately unlock the personal wealth trapped in business. Exit Planning Institute CEO Christopher Snider demonstrates how strategic exit planning will help you achieve improvements today while positioning you to build wealth for generations. Secure your success along other value creators. Discover, prepare, and decide what your walk to destiny will ultimately be. If executed correctly, these strategies can grow a business owner's wealth by 10 times. Walking to Destiny, the second edition. The 11 actions an owner must take to rapidly grow value and unlock wealth. Get your copy today at www.walkingtodestiny.com.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Exit Is Now podcast. Hanging out here with Jesse Hudson. For those of you that follow the show, know EPI, our Director of Business Development here. As we just talked before the break too, employee like number 5 has been here for 7 years. And in this show, we are flipping the script. So we are having folks come in that are close to us, close to me, and actually asking me questions, which this is the first show that we've done this. Right. I think going pretty well, but certainly a little awkward. Not kind of you talking at before the break as we kind of kicked off. I'm a planner.
Yeah.
So like not being in control right now is actually quite odd for me. But nonetheless, I think that we are putting together a pretty good show. So let's continue down the track and fire away.
All right. Well, yeah, it's my plan to keep you on your toes and
sure
off balance.
I am sure it is.
So we talked a little bit about some of our beginnings together. We've talked, more recently about some of your learnings and takeaways. I think a time that keeps coming back up, that reoccurs, especially in our conversations at the leadership level and just around EPI, is really that transition year for us of 2020.
Big year.
A big year for us for a variety of reasons. And, maybe you might call that kind of the middle of the conversations that we've been having today. And one of the decisions that we made actually in 2019 going into 2020 was to start working with a firm by the name of Initiative One.
Sure. And
going through what they call their organizational leadership training. And in that, a concept that we learned from Initiative One was really this destination disease. And it's the thing that is on the horizon that once you get there, that's accomplishments. That's winning. That's the goal, and everything will be all sunshine and rainbows. And I think for you, Scott, being a planner, you are kind of looking to the future, and you do want to have, kind of a grasp or an idea of where you're going and why you're going there. How did that concept of destination disease hit you? Is that something you felt like you struggled with previously, and what have you learned through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good perspective. I guess I didn't know what destination disease was before I met Fred and Tracy Johnson. So that was I think an aha moment going through that training. And for those of you that are followers of the Exit Is Now podcast, we've talked about it quite a bit. And for me, I guess, maybe how have I embraced that a little bit more today? Because I think I'm still a visionary, still a planner to that vision as well.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that I was just the way I'd answer your question, Jesse, is that I think if you looked at me before the Initiative One training, I was so focused on getting to that end goal that it was like pretty much at any cost.
Right.
I think it was at the cost of like my personal life, like the blend and balance of life. I think it was at a cost of relationship and people. It might have even been at the cost of customers or relationships that we could have had or partnerships that we could have had, because I was just so focused on getting to that end goal, getting to that destination. Now I'd like to think that I'm a little bit more, like my dad says, a little fast and flexible.
Okay.
And I'd like to think that although we have a vision in mind, right, we're in the new year here, and we still have that big grand goal, but how we get there is a little bit more fluid. And I think that I'm more focused on, though we know the long-term goal, I'm more focused maybe on the short term and making sure that we have the right pieces together and that our people are happy. And I guess I feel today is as long as the foundation is good, we'll likely get there. So I'm not necessarily as focused on the destination long term. I'm focused on that like first three hour trip of a 3-segmented RV trip down to Florida, right? That's kind of how I describe it.
Well, what's the digging into that a little bit deeper, but like what's the mechanism or the thing that you go back to that reminds you that you need to have healthy goals and a healthy pace and really a purpose that works well for your life? Like what's the thing that kind of brings you back to reality so that you don't fall into that trap again?
Yeah, I think that I would say that going back to the Initiative 1 training, I think that understanding your purpose matters.
Yeah.
So out of this Initiative 1 training, and I would welcome everybody to just Google Initiative 1 Leadership Institute. They're out of Wisconsin. Out of this training, everybody in the group has to write their purpose statement.
Okay.
And I would say that before that, I didn't really have a lot of investigation into purpose, certainly didn't have a written purpose. But once I found that, I think when the time gets difficult where I'm kind of maybe pushing to that destination a little bit too hard, that coming back to the purpose and saying, okay, am I on purpose? Am I going the right way? Am I more directed? I'd also say, again, going back to one of the things you taught me, it's a lot more data-driven. So I think that I was throwing these grand goals out, I guess 7 years ago when you started, and then driving everybody, kind of a hard driver to that goal with really no sense of, is it even possible?
Yeah.
So I think we make hard goals today, but they're a lot more attainable, and because I think they're more data-driven and realistic. So even though they might be stretch goals, you can still see the end game. So it's just a little bit, I guess I live more in like this, in the real world these days than like this purely almost fantasy land of like, we're gonna quadruple the company in a 12 to 18 month period. It's not likely, not to say that you can't do it, but it's just, if you're just going to hard drive to that goal every day that you're in the office, one, you're probably never going to get there, and two, you'll probably never get there anyways because it's just almost impossible. I'd like to think that our goals are possible, but difficult, versus when you came around, they're like, dude, that's impossible and difficult, So I'd like to think about it in that way.
Yeah. Oh, that's fair. I appreciate that. Staying in the year 2020, I think that was a rough year for most human beings for a variety of reasons. And as a business owner, you even have a unique set of challenges. Yeah. Because you're not just worried about yourself and your family and your sphere, your bubble, to use that 2020 term. Yeah. But you've got employees. And I've heard you talk about that and how you and Chris thought through what is our response to a global pandemic and how do we move this company forward and continue to provide for these other families that depend on us. There's a quote that I heard a number of years ago. It's attributed to somebody else, but the person that I heard it from was actually, at the time, the head football coach at Ohio State, Urban Meyer. Okay. And he's got this little equation he used to put up on the walls that said E plus R equals O, which is an event happens, a response to that event happens, and then an outcome is the output. Yeah. And he talks about you don't control the events. You can control your response. Sure. You don't really control the outcome, but you influence it, right? Like, like you influence it. And I think the Scott Snider of 2019, his response to situations would look a lot different than the Scott Snider of now, like your response to events. Yeah. Like, what is going through your head now that wasn't back then?
God, what a great question. So again, I was just talking about this the other evening as well, about the influence that Fred and Tracy Johnson had. What I didn't know going into that Initiative 1 training, which we did through COVID, and that, I guess, first wave of COVID in 2020, what I didn't realize then was the impact that it would have on me personally, not just professionally, right? You think leadership training, like I'm going to be a better leader, be a better business owner, be a better, president of the company and all that stuff. I didn't realize how deep that impact was going to run as me as a human being. I'd like to think that the simplest answer is I'm much more mellow and understanding than I was back then. Like I just and it's almost odd for me to actually reflect on, because I was like, I think I'm so much more mellow and flexible that I don't even I can't even believe that was me back then. I think that it was a very difficult guy to work for, because I think that I was so inflexible, so destination driven, that the culture just had to be kind of a tough gig. I always wonder, like with you and with Josh, why you guys stuck around. Like I guess we were good friends outside of the business.
Yeah,
I'm always so thankful for it, because I was like, man, I was a son of a bitch to work for. But I just think that today, that influence is a lot more, again, fast and flexible, a lot more understanding, a lot more of taking in other people's perspectives, and a lot more understanding that hiccups come kind of along the way. And I would actually, saying that and thinking about your equation, I guess I would agree with Urban Meyer, or whoever put together the original equation, that you can't necessarily 100% control the outcome, but that R in that equation has a lot to do with it. And that I think pivoting post-COVID and seeing how we can, because we all had to let go a little bit of control.
Oh, yeah.
The biggest thing was Chris, my dad, the majority owner of our company, the creator of the methodology, almost gave the keys 100% over to me, you, and the leadership team. Is that at that time, Chris was working his way out of the day-to-day operations. And if he was here, I think that he would say, look, though I could give you some advice on how to pivot this company, I don't necessarily know enough about how this company runs to actually effectively pivot it. So take the keys and make it happen for us, man. Like, make it happen. And so for me, same type of thing, is that I had to really lean into our people and say, look, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I act like I know it all, but I really don't.
Right.
And we're in a dire need here of change. So help me. And I think that R was a mindset. The reaction that I had was a more of a community mindset, where it was like, it's not about just me, it's about everybody. And it's, to your point, a sensitive time for any human being right then. Everybody was handling it in different ways.
Right.
If you think about what's going on in our country back then, there was all kinds of different stuff outside of the pandemic that was even going on.
Right.
So a lot of just pressure in life, I think, from people, or a lot of just thoughts flying through their head. So just being a lot more flexible, a lot more understanding, allowed us to get to the outcome that we wanted. And I don't know if it was natural or not, right? It was like I just had to go do that, whether I agreed with how I had to handle that or not. Thank God that it happened that way, though, because we all came out a hell of a lot more stronger with a whole new platform and perspective on life and business. And so, yeah, I just think that, what a wild time. But that is definitely, it's interesting to think of that equation, because I think that if I would have handled it Scott of old and been like super hard driving and not understanding, that the outcome would have certainly been different. So I don't, yes, you can't control 100% of the outcome, but that R is a critical part in that equation. That's such a good way to think about that time.
Well, I really have one other thing I wanted to talk to you about before we end our time here.
Sure.
And you already mentioned this a couple of times, going back to kind of the beginnings of my time here professionally at EPI, and even Josh Koza, that there was this level of trust and familiarity that you had because of relationships outside of the business. Well, now that you're a company of 20, 30 plus employees, trust is still important. It's still very necessary, but you don't have that when somebody walks in the door for the first time. So what do you think is your best way forward, or your best approach to building trust, especially with folks that you don't work with on a day-to-day basis? Like they're not on your team, they're not on the leadership team, they're in a different department. How do you go about building trust and building those relationships with newer folks? Yeah,
it's been one of the biggest challenges over the past couple of years, right? Is again decentralizing yourself, relinquishing control, trusting in your folks that you put into place. If you're a business owner listening to the show, maybe you have gone through this with your 15th employee, 30th employee, 45th employee. And as EPI grows from 30 to 50, 55 people over the next 2 or 3 years, it is pretty awkward and uncomfortable. But one thing, again, going back to this Initiative 1 training that I think was important, is that we've developed these trust accelerators. So whether I have a deep relationship with you or not at EPI, whether it's like a relationship that you and I have, or somebody that you've hired and I'm 4 times removed from them that I don't really know, one thing that I do know is that we have created these trust accelerators. So we have these things in common that we're always kind of working on and working towards. I don't know if it's one of those things where you never get there, but you're always evolving and working on it. So it creates this nice kind of organizing principle or foundation. We have pretty prominent core values as well. And we kind of run the value acceleration methodology, right? So we're kind of all running in it in some way, shape, or form. So I think that with those things in mind, and my still deep trust in my leadership team, I think it's allowed us to kind of hire those people and integrate them into our culture and be pretty successful.
Yeah.
You know, we have a high employee satisfaction rating. We have a high retention rate. So even though I might not know the folks that come in today, I know that we have this foundation that's set that actually brings us a little closer together. Even though I might not have hired you directly or interact with you directly every single day, I can look across the table or at one of our quarterly renewals when we have all the company there on a Monday morning company-wide meeting and know that whether you are employee 2 or employee 35, we do share all of that in common. So that, and I would encourage all owners to kind of investigate that, because it is a difficult, without that in place, I think I would be like wildly uncomfortable because there's no foundation that's built. I'm just 100% putting my trust in you to go out and hire the right people and trying to have this relationship with them that actually has no foundation. So at least we can start with every employee that comes in here and me and them have a similar foundation that we're coming to. That's, I think, how I would have randomly answer that question.
No, I appreciate that. It's very insightful. Honestly, I did want to know the answer to that question. I wanted to figure out where your head is at. And Scott, I really appreciate you being a guest on the podcast today.
Man, right. Thanks for having me on your show. So, Jesse, seriously, thanks for coming in. I hope you guys enjoyed our first show. We'll have several of these throughout the year. Every 4th or 5th show that we run, we'll have a guest on that flips the script and digs into, I guess, my life and my business. So with that, folks, thanks for tuning in. Our next show will be on February 28th. Feel free to subscribe, listen, and leave a review on all of your podcast platforms. We'll see you next time. Thanks.